Hello lovelies, these are the stitches that you are going to find in some of my embroidery patterns. We're going to start with a very simple stem stitch. This involves coming up through the fabric and doing a stitch, a small stitch length. Go back down through the fabric and then bring your needle up through the fabric about halfway along between that first stitch. Then do another stitch length and bring your needle up through the hole that you last went down in, just like this. And so you're going down and back up through the fabric in that last hole, in that last stitch. And we're going to do that all the way along to the end. This works fantastically for stems and stalks, and even for text and lettering. This next stitch is a back stitch. You're going to do a small stitch length, and then you're going to leave a space, and then you're going to come up through the fabric and go back down at the end of that first stitch. So you'll do a stitch, and then you'll leave a space, and then you'll do the stitch going back down into the previous hole. So you've just got a nice line of stitches, all equal and even distances apart. Again, this works great for stems and stalks, and I use it for most of the flowers in my patterns. This next stitch is a chain stitch. Bring your needle up through the fabric, and we're going to make a loop, and we're going to go back down into the fabric in the same spot that we came up in. But leave a loop, you're going to need this. Bring your needle back up through the fabric in that loop. This is the first link of your chain stitch. You're now going to go back down through that hole that you've just come up through, leave the loop of the thread, and bring your needle up through the fabric in that loop. Back down in through that hole, back up through the fabric inside the loop. These are your links for your chain stitch. This is your fly stitch. So you're going to come in at the top of that leaf and do one stitch length. Then come up at the very top next to your beginning of your first stitch. And you're going to leave a loop because you're going to go in on the other side of that first stitch that you did. Leave a loop because you're going to bring your needle up through the fabric at the base of that first stitch. Pull it very gently, and then you're going to tack it back into place by going underneath that stitch with your needle. Bring your needle up through the fabric a little bit lower down, following the shape of the leaf. Leave your loop of thread, and then put your needle through on the other side. Bring it back up through the fabric at the base of those other stitches. Pull it gently, and you will create this V shape all the way down this stitch. To finish it off, we are going to just put in a couple of straight stitches on that bottom curve. The satin stitch can be a bit tricky, but you will find that with practice you can make it look as smooth as possible. Basically, you want your stitches to all be the same, going in the same direction. And you can either work from top to bottom or bottom to top. It can sometimes help when you're doing satin stitch to leave a small space and fill that in afterwards. One tip I would give you is to use the eye of the needle and gently follow the stitches down, just a bit like that, so that you're sort of straightening them out. It takes practice, but the best thing I can do is get you to watch this and try to do it. Trying to describe it can be quite difficult. This next flower is the woven wheel. You're going to need to do 5 lines radiating out from the middle to the outside of your circle. There has to be an odd number for this to work, so it can be 5 or 7 or more if you like. But we're going to do an odd number of spokes. Picture them as spokes on a wheel. So we're going to stitch those in. It doesn't matter what order you do them in, but they're going to be 5 straight stitches going from the middle of the circle to the outside of the circle. When we've done our 5th one, we are going to come up through the fabric in a different spot, but very close to the circle. So bring your needle up through the fabric. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to go over the first one, under the second one, over the next one, under the next one. Basically, you're going all the way around those spokes of the wheel, over and under and over and under. And as you work that, you will see that it forms a really lovely rose shape. I'm going to fast forward this in a moment to the point where we've actually nearly filled it in. And if you want to make your rose a little bit more 3-dimensional, you can sort of fluff up those outer stitches with your needle a little, just sort of like tease them up. But that's your woven wheel stitch. It makes a beautiful rose. Okay, this next one's a little bit more trickier. This is a bullion knot rose. If you want to learn how to do bullion knots, go forward to the point in this video that's got bullion knots in it. But what you're going to do is a very small bullion knot first. That's your center. You could do a couple of French knots if you want, but I'm using a small bullion knot here. What you're going to do is bullion knots going around the outside of it, and the start of each bullion knot is going to slightly overlap the last one. So we'll do a bullion knot. I do love a bullion knot. It's lots of wrapping, and once you get the hang of them, you will be a master of them. But the way to do it is to do them, they're going to get longer, so you're going to need bigger spaces for your stitches, and you're going to need more wraps for your bullion knots. So at the beginning, my bullion knots probably got 5 wraps around them, where you're going to come up, and then you're going to basically almost like a triangular shape, because you're taking it round, but you're growing. Your bullion knots are going to grow as you go around the rose. This next stitch is a lazy daisy. So come up through the fabric, and we're going to make a loop with our thread and go back down through that same hole. Remember to keep the loop, you're going to need it. Bring your needle up through the fabric at the point of your petal and then tack it in place. And literally going to do that all the way around. That's your lazy daisy. We're going to do a chain stitch circle. So we've already done the chain stitch, and we're just going to apply that here. But the best way to fill in a circle with chain stitch is to do an outer ring of chain stitch. So you're always going to come up through the fabric and go back down through the fabric at the same point, but leave a loop. Again, you're going to need this. When you bring your needle up through the fabric, you're going to come up inside that loop. So we're going to do the chain stitch all the way around, and then we're going to finish it. Then we're going to do a second chain stitch, an inner circle, and we're going to do this all the way round until we finish it with those circles of chain stitch decreasing every time. You can finish it off with a French knot in the middle or just a really small chain stitch, but that's the best way to do the circle. Unless you want it to have a spiral effect, in which case you could just literally carry on going. But as you can see, we're going to get with this one, we're going to get to the end and finish it off and then start the second row of circles. This next circle, or sun, whatever you want it to be, is going to be a padded satin stitch. So I'm going to use a stem stitch. No, actually, I think I'm using a split stitch there. Okay, so we're going to use a split stitch all the way around. And a split stitch is basically small stitches, all the same length, coming up through the fabric in the middle of the thread. So you're splitting your thread. You could use stem stitch, you could use running stitch, you could use back stitch. But basically we're doing a circle because this makes the circle nice and neat. As you can see, my drawing of a circle is not brilliant. So by stitching the circle, we're going to give a slightly raised effect to our satin stitch. So this is going to be our padded satin stitch. Now, when you're doing a circle with satin stitch, I always recommend starting in the middle. You're going to do your first straight line. Come up on the outside of that split or stem stitch and go all the way to the bottom to the outside of that stitch, right down the middle. That gives you a good starting point for doing your circles. But remember, always stay on the outside of that stem or split stitch, and that will give you your raised effect for your padded satin stitch. This next stitch is called a Wheatear Stitch. It's great for ferns. Bring your needle up through the fabric and a stitch length away, go down into the fabric, and we're going to make a V shape. What this is actually going to look like is an arrow. So we're going to do a V shape, and then we're going to do one more small straight stitch from above, meeting at that point. Now you can see it's an arrow, isn't it? So one more stitch length away, come up through the fabric, and we're going to take our needle, got a bit of a tangle there, we're going to take our needle and we're going to pass it underneath those 3 stitches. We're not going down through the fabric, we are just going underneath the stitches. We're making a loop. So it's a kind of it looks a bit like a lazy daisy stitch, but not quite. So you want it to be a loop like that. And then we are going to do those 2 points of that arrow again. So one straight stitch there and another straight stitch there. Leave a stitch length and come up through the fabric, and we're going to go underneath those stitches above. So underneath those 3 stitches above, back down, I'm going to carry on just like that. So you do your 2 straight stitches, and then we're going to come up through the fabric, 1 stitch length away, pass them through, and that's your Wheatear stitch. Great for ferns. This is your French knot. Bring your needle up through the fabric and wrap around the needle twice and then back down through the fabric. Up through the fabric, wrap the needle around it once, twice, and down back through the fabric. Pull it gently. French knots. And the next one is seed stitch. These are small straight stitches and they are great for filling things in. So you could fill leaves in or petals. They're just small straight stitches and you can put them anywhere you like, very haphazard, or you can put them in a bit more of an order, but they make a great filler stitch. And that's your seed stitch. And here we are with the bullion knots. Bring your needle up through the fabric and down through the fabric a stitch length away, depending on how long you want your bullion knot to be. And we are then going to bring our needle back up through the fabric where we came up the first time, and we're going to wrap our needle. And we need enough wraps around it to cover that area between those entry and exit points of that needle. Then we're going to pull it gently through. You can tease it down a little with the needle and then put it back down through the fabric. So come up through the fabric. That's point A. And we're going to go down into the fabric. That's point B. Bring your needle back up through the fabric at point A. And the needle needs to be wrapped with the thread right next to it. So wrap it 5, 6, however many times you want to wrap it. Just wrap that needle. But you need enough wraps to cover the area between point A and point B. Use your finger and your thumb to hold the wrap in place and gently pull your needle through. Then you are going to put your needle back down through the fabric at point B. And you can tease it into place so that those wraps are nice and even and nice and tidy. And you can make your bullion knot as long or as short as you want. And you're going to need these for those bullion roses. This next one is a whipped running stitch. I've already done the running stitch, which is a stitch, a space, a stitch, a space, a stitch, a space. And with your second thread, I've come up right next to the first stitch and we're going to go under from bottom to top. The first stitch and the second stitch, under from bottom to top. And the third stitch, under from bottom to top, underneath the stitch every single time. This next stitch is the petal stitch. Come up through the fabric and we are going to do 1 stitch length. But don't pull it all the way through. It helps to keep it as a loop for a guide, because halfway between those two, between that stitch, we're going to bring our needle up through. And we're going to do a lazy daisy. So you're going to do a loop and then bring your needle up through the fabric, which would be at the point, the pin point at the top for your petal, and sort of tack it in place. Now you're going to come back up through the fabric a stitch length away, and we're going to go down into the fabric just at the point at the base of that loop. Keep a loop there. It helps you to guide, because you're now going to bring up your needle midway between the entry and the exit point of that stitch, and we're going to do another loop. And this is like a lazy daisy on a stem. So if you think this is the stem stitch on the bottom and then the lazy daisy loop as you're going along, it's the easiest way to think about this. So it's a stem and a lazy daisy. And you can do them as long as you like, with as big a gap between them as you like. And you will find all of these stitches are used in my Larry the cat, Petunia the pig, and my little brown hen, and every other pattern as well. I hope they help. Happy stitch.